Hello, Bio30, and welcome to Parts of the Brain. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the structures and functions of the brain, as well as talk about the structures and functions of the lobes. Now, these may seem like the same kind of idea, but once we get into the pictures, you're going to see what makes them different. So we're going to start off by just doing a little quick reminder. So a reminder that our central nervous system is made up of both our brain and our spinal cord. And within our brain, we have two parts. We have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Now, you may hear people say, like, the left hemisphere is for your mathematics and scientific, and your right is for your creative, and that's not 100% true. So, if that's what you've heard, please push that aside. There is no actual one side is better at the other. But what we do know is that the brain is connected in the center by something called the corpus callosum. And this structure is important because it lets our right side talk to the left side. Now, the other interesting thing about the brain is that when you lift up your right hand, your left side of your brain is actually the part that's controlling it. When you lift up your left hand, it's the right side of the brain controlling it. Okay, so we're going to talk about all the different lobes of the brain and the structures inside the brain. So let's start there. You have this picture in your notes, so let's label it. We're start at the top with E. E is the cerebrum. It's the part of the brain that you would think when you think brain, is the most common, the pink folded, all those ridges and stuff. That's the cerebrum right there. Now, you don't have a line drawn in your notes, so please add it. This line just right here, right behind this structure, right before here on your notes, right, this little piece, is known as the hypothalamus. We then have the pituitary gland, the pons, the medulla oblongata, the corpus callosum, which is this piece right here, which I just explained is what talks to the left and right side and they pass information back and forth, the thalamus, and the cerebellum. So these are the structures that if we were to take a cross section of your brain that we would be able to see. Now, what I find very, very cool about your brain is the cross section of your brain allows us to see the structures in here and all the way down here, I should say, these pieces here. This is called the limbic system of your brain. And the limbic system is a very primitive part of your brain. Every animal has it, and some animals only have this much. They don't have all the cushioning on the top. They have very minimal cushioning on the top, and this is the biggest part of their brain. The limbic system is where our fight and flight is located. So remember sympathetic nervous system when we talked about stress in your body's response? It's all located in here. You have this part of your brain that allows your body to react to stresses and fears and dangers in a way that all animals do. But the cool part about our brain is then we have this little extra hat, okay, this cerebrum here that has so much more stuff to it that most other animals do not have, that allows us to have higher order thinking and processing, that when we access our limbic system, we actually are not accessing the four lobes of our brains properly. And I'm going to talk about that later and we'll talk about it in class, but I just wanted to touch on it a little bit because I think it is super, super cool. So let's talk about the functions. So first one is the cerebrum. Now you're going to notice I have way more spaces than you do in your notes for stuff. You're going to add a couple at the end of your notes. So the cerebrum, as I said earlier, makes up the four lobes, which we will talk about. It interprets, responds to all sensory information. The hypothalamus is really important. It is where your basic drives for hunger and thirst come from, where we process some emotions, basic emotions like fear and pleasure. And it's where the coordinated actions of our pituitary gland happen. This is going to be key for chapter 13 when we talk about hormones, because the pituitary gland, or what we refer to in Bio30 as the master gland, is where we control the release of almost all of our hormones. Chapter 13, big deal. The cerebellum, or what I like to call the little brain at the back of the brain, is where we get our posture and balance from. The medulla oblongata, located on the brain stem, is where autonomic functions happen, heart rate and blood pressure. Now, you may remember back from when I talked about the neurons and I talked about the brain stem and gray matter. I talked about people breaking their neck, okay, and dying from breaking their neck. This is why, because if you see where the medulla oblongata is located, it's located just up above where your cervical vertebrae are, your axis and your atlas, your top two. So if someone breaks their neck just above that, they're actually severing the medulla, which is your heart rate, blood pressure, breathing. You won't have those anymore. So that's the medulla oblongata's job. You may think of a movie called Waterboy and the scene with medulla oblongata, which we'll watch at some point. So the pons relays the information between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. So it actually talks and takes the four lobes and then adds in the cerebellum for posture and balance. And then last but not least is the corpus callosum, which again, I said, talks to the right and left hemisphere, allows them to chat to each other, are essentially relay information to each other. You need to add the pons and the corpus callosum to your notes. So here's a picture of what you probably think the brain looks like. And normally it would be all pink. It's all this folded matter and it's a little squishy, okay? But for our purpose, we have color coordinated so you can see the four lobes. So what I would like you to do is follow along and label those lobes with me. So the frontal lobe. I love the frontal lobe. It's the best part of the brain, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because the frontal lobe is what makes us who we are and sets us apart from all the other organisms on the planet. It gives us our personality, our memory, our speech, our voluntary movements, and our intelligence. The frontal lobe is massive. You have any small sort of brain damage up there, and it could affect so many different things. Okay. It allows us to do empathy and sympathy and read people's facial expressions and help us remember things and recall things. Okay. It is really, really, really important. The back part of your brain, just on the top back part, is called the parietal. And we like to refer to it as the triple T. Now, the parietal actually has way more to it, but we like to keep it simple in Bio30, and we like to say it's taste, touch, and temperature. So anything you taste, touch, or temperature around you or internally is done by the parietal. The occipital, located at the very back of your brain, is what takes information in for vision. So whatever your eye see, the back of your brain interprets. And then the temporal lobe is for hearing, language, and emotions as well. Now, the language and emotions is kind of connected because when we speak, we have to inflect with what we're saying and we put emotion into what we're saying. What we interpret is then spoken back out loud. So our temporal lobe actually has some unique parts to it where certain pieces of it, if damaged, can cause these different types of things called aphasia. There's Wernicke's aphasia and Broca's aphasia. What it means is in one type of aphasia, okay, so I believe it's Broca's aphasia, you actually no longer can speak words. In Wernicke's aphasia, if you have damage in a specific area, you can still speak, but your sentences make no sense. So you can process the information, but you can't speak. You can speak out, but you can't actually give sentences that make sense. In Broca's aphasia, you can interpret the information, but you can't speak it out at all. Okay. So the temporal lobe is really important. Now, most students mix up the temporal and the parietal because temporal starts with T. So they're like, oh, yeah, the triple T, taste, touch, temperature. But the way I like to remember where the temporal is if you take your fingers and put them on the temples of your head. So if you know where the temples are, just slightly above your eyes, if you draw a straight line back, that's your ears. So your temporal lobe is located by your ears, which is by your temples. So hopefully in this lesson, you learned a couple things: structures and functions of the brain. So thinking of that cross section, and then the structures and the functions of the lobe of the brain. If you have any questions, please let me know.